America, we got to get back to doing what's expected of us as free citizens in this democracy. That means being tolerant, being respectful, staying informed, and being engaged. I'm former Congressman Joe Walsh. Follow me here and join the millions of Americans who are renewing their social contract with each other. The social contract, it's on us. Hey, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Former Congressman Joe Walsh here with you. Hope your week is off to a good start. Thank you for tuning in. I just listened to that opening right there that I don't listen to enough. And what do I say there? I say that, hey, America, we got to get back to a country where all of us citizens are doing what's expected of us as free citizens in this democracy, being tolerant, being respectful, and all the rest. And I listened to that just there. And that's exactly what I want to talk about today. Everybody listening to me, you know me, right? And you know my political history, from divisive political right-wing asshole to woke, newly tolerant, still conservative guy former congressman trying to help heal the divide that he helped to create. I'm obsessed with this notion of trying to get the country speaking with each other and listening to each other, because you know me, my familiar refrain, we are off the charts, dangerously divided. And you know me, my refrain, I don't think our democracy can stand if we stay that way, which is why I'm looking so forward to this conversation with two smart people, expert people, passionate people about this same project issue. Let me bring them in right now. Dr. Alice Maher and Dr. June Cleese. There they both are. Alice and June, hi, how are you both? Don't say anything yet, because I want to read a short bio of each of you before we jump in. Alice is a psychiatrist and classically trained psychoanalyst in New York City. She's the founder and director of Changing Our Consciousness, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the discovery of new ways of communicating across psychological divides. June is an educator and political culture reformer dedicated to the work of the United States civic wellness movement at the national, regional, and local levels. June's also the co-founder of Compassionate America, an initiative that stands as a 21st century philosophical message of hope and empowerment for the American people. Alice and June, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having us.
It's good. It's good to see you both. I am so looking forward to speaking with you because, and we could start in a million places, but I want to start where pretty much the language I use every day. I think the country's on a road right now where, like, we used to disagree with people politically and we'd call them our political opponent. And maybe June and Alice, it's because I'm in the trenches every day. But now it seems like we're on a road where we hate the people we disagree with. And I hear so many people every day tell me, Joe, that person's my enemy. That person's my enemy. This scares me. Start here, Alice and June. And obviously, we're not getting into the politics of anything. Do you worry? Like, do you get a sense that we're kind of in the same scary place right now?
Yes, the polarization is absolutely toxic. And it's dangerous. People don't listen to each other. People dismiss each other with these ism and phobia words. I work with individual people. I know them at the depth of their being, and I understand why they believe what they believe, whatever that is. It makes sense to me. But they go outside, and somebody calls them, you're one of those ism words, and you have no right to exist other than that. That has to change. And June and I are working very hard to find ways to actually invite that to happen, and a methodology to allow it to emerge.
June, jump in here and tell me if you agree with what Alice just said and what I led with, that we are at a super dangerous point right now because of this divide.
we're certainly not in a good place. And as a historian, there's that kind of metacognitive picture that allows us various types of comparisons, So am I concerned? I am deeply concerned about the nature of the divisions in our republic at this time. That said, I think one of the things we can't lose sight of, and this does play into the work that Alice and I do, is the resiliency of the American. I don't want to call it common sense because that's not entirely what this is about. I'm going to say common-hearted narrative about our history, where Americans have this undercurrent narrative that we don't talk about enough, which encompasses people in any time space bubble that we're talking about. So time space bubble is your historical reality, and the forces that shape it. But in any lived bubble of reality, time space wise, people are always there who are kind of with the Fred Rogers concept, the helpers, right? The people who want to mitigate, the people who are eager to see systems operate for the greater good and willing to at times even challenge their own biases, their own blind spots, etc., to overcome those differences in ways that don't necessarily mean that people have to change their minds. And that's a very clear point here we need to make. Nobody's proselytizing, it's not like that, but rather acknowledges that there is a coming together in a different way. Because a lot of times when we framework and we talk about these things, we talk about them as obviously in the framework of the duopoly and that struggle with the duopoly, and then the either or propositions, because obviously when we get to the actual active governance, that's where the pedal hits the metal. But that's not the only story of American politics and political culture, right? There is a whole other history here, and we're continuing that historical narrative, one that is anchored in maintaining domestic tranquility and general welfare as a part of civic duty.
I want to spend obviously most of the time talking about the work you're doing. To kind of start that though, I think it's helpful to get both of your perspectives on how the hell we got here. Like again, and maybe my vantage point is skewed because I'm in the trenches every day, but we're in a not good place where we're too divided and we hate people we disagree with and we don't listen, blah blah. Alice, how did we get here?
I think there are multiple factors. One of them that comes to mind immediately is the internet. Because when a person on the other side of a screen is dehumanized, they're words on a page, and you don't have the humanity of the person. You don't have their story. You don't have the gleam in the eye. You don't have the engagement. You have words on a page that you can instantly, cancel culture. We unfriend, ghost, delete, cancel in one way or the other. If I don't like you, I can make you go away.
Yeah.
Just by pushing a button. Or I can just yell at you and insult you because who cares? It's just, I'm just typing, you're a jerk. And we don't do that in public, in a dinner table, but we do that on the computer all the time. And then the algorithms say, oh, here's the people on your side. And then you can fight the people on the other side, and nobody has to be vulnerable. Nobody has to care.
June, add to that. How did we get here? How do you think we got to this point?
Sure. So in addition to those, the elements of social media and the internet dynamics, I mean, we can pick that apart left, right, center all day long, right? But we also have the fact that we are the most entertained generations in human history. We are the most entertained generations in human history. When you think about the amount of entertainment on demand and literally in the palm of our hands at this point. Now, I'm Gen X, and I can tell you're both older than me.
Oh my God. Look, here she goes, Alice. Here she goes.
Right. And so, but my point being, we do remember a time when entertainment was not so hands-on, right? Not so immediate.
That's right.
And of course, this precedes our lifetimes. We the advent of this kind of mass entertainment. But that element.
But why is that bad, June? Why is that bad?
It's not bad per se, but what it does is it tends to amplify combative narratives as we see
Oh,
them played out in right, and we get into our minds too much, right? We are not as anchored in the body of being a body politic, and we're dealing with so much of this cerebral and imaginative element. Then you throw in the internet, and that, like Alice just got done indicating, right, that imaginary person. Well, what are we doing? We're filling in the blanks with all of these things that we have been absorbing from media, from social media, but also the entertainment, and how we craft these stories and we craft these narratives of combativeness as something that appeals to people. But I'll add one more thing, and I would be remiss without doing it, Joe, which is the nature of, and there's lots of books that talk about the history of this, which is the nature of how the duopoly comported itself in two major institutions. These they're corporations, they're machines, and they have a right to exist, but they don't have a right to usurp the authority of the American people. And we know from the politics industry and the Parties versus the People and a lot of other great research out there that the parties themselves have facilitated and collaborated in the division of the American people. We know that.
Again, spot on. It's like still bizarrely crazy to me that a country of 330 million people has two political parties. And I think you're right. It's fostered an us versus them, a binary kind of a thing that I don't think you'd see as much in more of a parliamentary system with 3 or 4 or 5 parties.
That's right. June, when you talked about the body politic, it made me think of, I was raised a classical Freudian, and it was all body metaphors, the oral, anal, phallic, genital models. I think of it as we have 2 eyes and 2 sides of our body for a reason. And if the right eye is programmed to see right, that's what they're going to see. But if you understand that there's a left eye that sees the landscape differently, and you adapt, you can get, adaptation and depth perception and clarity and perspective. If each eye says the other eye's landscape is stupid or wrong or crazy, you're blind and you trip all over yourselves. What we need are leaders who can say, I see this way, but I understand that other side exists. And here's how I hear you.
Alice, that's great. And June, jump in. And I agree with you that we need leaders to help begin to do something about this. But I'm just thinking out loud, political leaders, former congressmen, senators, they're all incentivized right now not to do this.
Right.
They're incentivized to attack the other side,
That's
to
right.
not reach across the aisle. I know I was, yeah.
And some of this is the fact, as we all know, that there has been a decline in the teaching of civics. And,
Amen.
We absolutely, know that in the schools, there's good work being done with history. There's good work being done with our both, at the college level, the high school, elementary school, all the levels, right? We know there's good work being done out there in relationship to teaching, even, political science and history. But civics is its own thing. Civics is something that allows young people, in particular, as their identity forming, to start to get a sense of who they are in relationship to the civic world around them. And civics has it's a combination of different disciplines, right? And so the good news is there's lots of people around this country right now trying to do from within systems and outside of systems, trying to build up the civic knowledge and refresh the civic knowledge. Because let's face it, those of us who grew up on Schoolhouse Rock probably do need a few refreshers, right?
So this is the only question I'm going to ask before we get into what you two are doing that will even touch the political.
Yeah.
And slap me upside the head if you want. My politics, the journey I've been on. And I agree. And so my every day now is trying to work every day on what you two do, trying to engage with people and have common ground and have these conversations. And I balance that with my own politics. And I don't know the politics of either one of you. That guy in the White House is an existential threat to my democracy. And so it's a weird balance, you two. I feel like we're at war right now. I've got to save our democracy, but come sit down with me over here and let's find some common ground. And I know because I hear from others who are struggling with this. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because it really is about, again, I come back to the civics, which teaches the art of civic diplomacy, which will segue into our work. But I want to let Alice have a chance to respond to you as well.
Just, one side has to lead, and you vote for that side. One side of the, I'm right-handed, I'm going to lead with that. But I need the left for stability. And I think just, I've been doing this waging dialogue project for a long time. And, for example, I did a dialogue, it's actually on YouTube, with a guy named Bobby Powell, who is a MAGA supporter. He was at the Capitol on January 6th. He's very much a Trump supporter, a journalist. And we had this fascinating dialogue and posted it. And we fell in love. Just
literally. How, and I agree, and that's what I want to get into. But like as June and Alice, at this moment in time, when things are so heightened, and I can just tell you on the ground, we live in a country right now where people who are not Trump supporters quite literally believe the future of our democracy is on the line right now. And people who are Trump supporters believe that he is the one who's going to save this country. So the stakes are so high. So I guess I find it difficult to pull people daily off of the battlefield and say, let's have a cup of coffee and have a conversation. Because go ahead, June, jump in.
I was going to say, here's the thing that I maybe a little bit of a different perspective, and I'm going a little bit more from the meta on this, which is the future of our democracy is always at stake. And what I mean, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, June, continue.
And what I mean by that is because it's dependent on an informed and engaged citizenry. And whenever the citizenry is disengaging, that's a problem, in our society. Now, granted, we all have limited bandwidth, and I think this is a really important thing to acknowledge to people, especially for your listeners, in terms of, if you're looking to kind of strike this balance, go to the next level of thinking, which is, no matter what my contemporary reality is, the future of democracy will always, like we just said, right, be at stake unless the citizenry engages, stays engaged, and continues. But nobody has to do everything. And I think this is part of our era. Yeah. This is part of this hyper entertainment and hyper access to information we have all the time. There is a sense of compulsion. We need to know everything, do everything, be everything, and all those, and solve everything. And it's not possible. And we have opinions on things that, let's face it, most of us know zip, zilch, or just a surface level understanding about. And we're encouraged to do all of that. And instead, what we need to do is circle into practices of that are going to start first with the individual. Okay, it has to start with an internal journey. What does my civic expression, what is that going to look like? What does that mean to me? Okay, then the next step in the process, as you sort of evaluate this, it's a question of, okay, you know what you may or ideally, you know what you believe, what you don't believe, and you're willing to explore the blank spaces, okay? But then the next part of this is, okay, now I have to decide, am I going to be a combative participant in this republic, or am I going to be a more compassionate collaborative? Okay, now that doesn't mean to go into all the kind of woo-wee stuff, the kumbaya. It's not about the kumbaya. It's about doing the work, right? That when you're out and about, whether you're at the grocery store, whether it's in your family, whether it's with your colleagues, that what you're doing is you're seeking to develop rapport that allow for functionality within the systems you operate. And that applies obviously to the civic world as well, right? Which is what we're focusing on here. And when you think about that, then that allows you to find where your passion is, where your walk might be. Are you going to be the person who decides to go attend public school board meetings or the local city council just to know what's going on and how you may be of assistance? Or are you going to be the one that, I'm not that social, and that's okay. You don't have to be, but write your congresspersons or, start a blog or do those things that, because when we think too much about the voting element and the us versus them side of it, we forget what citizenship really in its whole is.
June, I freaking love you, because what you just said, the future of our democracy will always be at stake. Yes. That is such healthy perspective.
Really
and it is on us. It's up to us.
Always.
Alice, how'd you meet this Bobby, and how'd that conversation go? That initial conversation?
We met through Facebook. I have my Facebook page has people from all political perspectives.
Oh my God, awesome.
I keep them in the room.
Yeah.
And, they fight, so when I decided to do this public dialogues, he volunteered, and we just did it. I think it's hard. The part of the problem is we all said we should do that, but speaking as someone from studied the depth of mental health or psychological thinking, it's hard. It's not like, oh, just go talk to them and it'll be fine. It's not. It's we're programmed to fight, flee, or freeze. We're not programmed to stay in a room with a tiger and figure out how to tame them and how to befriend them. Yeah. So we need a theory, we need a methodology, we need a movement, we need safe spaces, we need desire. Because a lot of the people who are impotent right now could do it, but they have no place to. Is
there, from both of your perspectives, is there sufficient desire among people to do this?
I think there is. They just don't know where to put it. That's why we want to capture it. We want to
and I agree.
Here's how you can do it. Here's some ideas about how to begin.
Yeah, I agree. I observed the national civic wellness movement that's going on. You can call it civic health, civic wellness, whatever you want to call it. It's a broader phenomenon in American history where the American people, and this is very unknown because it's not talked about enough in the media, even in social media, whatever. But there are literally over about, I think they're cataloging it at maybe 15 to 17,000 organizations across this country, representing thousands and thousands of people who are very active in trying to turn down the heat, as Pierce Godwin of the Listen First Project mentions, on this political tension and toxicity. So we have to look at it more as hey, we're a generation that has manifested, we're responsible for this, whether and we have to own that responsibility, because if we don't own the responsibility, we have given away our power over our own systems of self-governance. So there's that. Yeah. And if in relationship to turning down the heat, then what we have to do is we have to think about, and I'm going to probably harp on this a little bit, but we have to keep thinking about what our role, if not duty, in our patriotic expression is tied to civic to not the civic diplomacy, but the preamble, right? Because the preamble is where it starts, and the domestic tranquility and general welfare can be very easily tended to without government, right? This is where the liberty element of whether you're a libertarian or not, doesn't matter. Liberty still matters here, no matter where you're coming from. This is where the liberty kind of hits the road, and this is where we say, I'm going to be a citizen of a certain expression. Your civic vibe. Think of it, your civic vibe.
I completely love that. It's why everything I do, I brand as the social contract. I've always loved that phrase, so I grabbed it. And all it is sort of like, as free citizens in this thing, what we're responsible to do. What are our responsibilities, right? Stay tolerant, be respectful, stay informed. You're right, but it's on us. Wagingdialogue.org is the website. Wagingdialogue.org is the project. It's what these two do. Alice, start explaining to me what exactly Waging Dialogue is.
Waging came from a particular prejudice that people have against me when I started doing this. That as soon as you use the word dialogue, people roll their eyes.
Oh my God!
Little old lady Pollyanna.
Hold my hand. Let's sing together. Yeah.
And sing "Kumbaya." We'll live happily ever after. So it is the opposite of that. It basically means if you want to have a connection with someone who's profoundly different from you, you need a space, you need time, you need insight, you need a methodology, you need the motivation to stay in the room over and over and over, tolerate the discomfort of not knowing what to say when people accuse you of something that may or may not be true, and stay in the room. This is what psychoanalysis is for individuals. We can do it on a larger scale, but it's waging. It's fighting a war in words over time. So that you don't have to then say, oh, they're the stupid ones or the bad ones, and I'll vote for somebody who's going to vote for somebody else to go push a button to go kill them.
Yeah, I love that. I love that word choice, waging dialogue. Because you're right, that word dialogue, eyes do roll, especially right now, eyes roll and you get all of that. That's provocative. Waging dialogue is a different spin. That's a different take.
Yeah. Hoping that it captures imagination.
Yeah, and it makes you pause and think for a moment. Principally, what's the activity of what you're trying to do with this? What are you mostly doing, engaging in with waging dialogue?
Well, the pilot projects that we've done have been a lot of these dialogues with dyads and small groups of people who think differently. Right now, I'm doing I'm working on the third or fourth one with a group of psychoanalysts who have different political beliefs and religious beliefs. And they're having a dialogue about that in public. And
in public.
We record it.
Okay.
It can be seen on YouTube. And it's you ask different questions. You're more curious than critical. You want to, look good yourself. And it's sort of.
And there's a moderator. These are moderated conversations.
We do it ourselves. We're all in the field where there's no moderator. There's just we just kind of ride the wave, and it's fascinating.
Will you go ahead, June?
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I think one of the things we do want to touch on, and this is Alice's to say, but I think we definitely want to touch on the theory, kind of the operational theory behind this, and in this work in particular. And then also, of course, we'll definitely want to talk about the Civics Corps and what we're doing with the younger generations. But Alice, I want to give you the floor here, if I may. Joe kind of usurped that a little bit from the facilitation. But yeah, Alice, please, I really think that's what we want to get out here today, is share a little bit more that there's a theory that is grounded in science, and then how we do interdisciplinary work around this.
Amen.
Just the simple elevator pitch is that we're programmed, what I said before, programmed to behave in ways that fight or flight. And so we can't blame each other for wanting to do that, if our instinct is to do that. But the science of neuroplasticity, which is relatively new, tells us that we can change our brain wiring over time with motivation, insight, hard work, and safe spaces to do it, a methodology to do it. So a place to go. If you don't like Trump and someone else does, come together once a week, once a month, in public, in private, write letters in between, try to push through and see what the similarities and differences are, where the points of overlap are. Sometimes a different metaphor can, for example, one of my analyst friends who loves Trump will call him the Jungian archetypal trickster, who just comes in, is mischievous and causes chaos and flips the script and is a shapeshifter and is calling our attention to underlying problems that we didn't know existed. So in that way, he sort of bridged the divides between the people who hated him and the people who liked him.
Yeah.
Like, there's something. Those kinds of things happen when you have these dialogues.
How do you motivate? What motivation do you use to get people to have these dialogues? You mentioned motivation is a key part of it.
Well, that's been an issue. I mean, people who are intrigued by what I'm doing will join in, and if they get it, but we need motivation on a large scale in order to make real change happen.
Because I've noticed, and then June, jump in. I've noticed as because I do a lot of this, and I encourage people to do this, especially among young people. I sense there's fear. People have a fear of doing this. Go ahead, June.
Well, I think the craving of normalcy, and now define normalcy, right? But basically the sense that life is operational. Okay, life is, it's going to come with the good, the bad, the ugly, and we're all going to have things within our individual lives. But that there's a sense of some sort of stability and normalcy is a normal human thing, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs kind of stuff, right? And I think there's going to be your motivator, because as things become more cacophonistic and it gets harder to focus on binge watching Netflix, people are going to start to pull out a little bit more of their shells. We do have an apathy dynamic, but we always have had an apathy dynamic. I mean, no matter what era, when, where, all that. You have people who care about more, you have people who care about less, all these kinds of things. But when it comes to the actual disruption of systems and systems change, that's where people will start to get frustrated. And especially if it becomes things like, the inconveniences are what we start to notice first before we tend to notice the real issues in the systems breakdown or the systems changes that are going on. And so, if the garbage isn't getting collected, that becomes something that people are going to become frustrated with, and frustration can move people from apathy into action, right? And from that then can come that's where the creation of spaces like what we're doing with this movement, which is waging dialogue. We're hoping that as a movement, we're trying to get folks to see that there are not only our spaces, there are others as well out there. We'd be remiss to say we're not part of a larger thing, and thank goodness we are. But the movement of waging dialogue is a little bit different because, as Alice already explained, and it's there to say, hey, are you ready? Are you ready? We have to basically, it's not an idealistic thing, and it does require a little bit of coaching, especially in the early stages of the process, so people can see the benefit of doing this work in their lives. Here's another element. You got to tie it to their practical realities.
Yeah.
You talk about it esoterically. You have to talk, and this is why the model we do with our students, I think, is very effective. You have to show them where this stuff hits the pedal hits the metal in their daily lives by utilizing these skill sets. So it isn't necessarily about, and this is where I kind of come back to that larger historical narrative. It isn't necessarily just about fixing the left-right division. It's about understanding that we're on a spectrum of political views, understanding that we ourselves fit in that spectrum of political views, and learning the power of curiosity in forging effective relationships, whether with or without difference, effective relationships that in which individuals can manage conflict, manage disagreement, and find, well, let's face it, solutions. If the pothole on your street is so big, guess what? I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, or Australian. I don't care what you are.
Well, not Australian. Forget the Australians. But I hear you, Jim.
That's an old joke. But we're all going to look at that pothole and say, let's fix it. I don't care about your politics.
Yeah.
What is though, Alice, the conversations, like I can hear one of my listeners right now asking this question. What's the ultimate goal? At the end of an hour, at the end of however long these are, you want, like, we've come together, we've found common ground on one or two solutions, or what? No,
not at the end. At the end of one conversation, you get you learn something about yourself, something about them. You reach an impasse, and then you say, "See you next month." And then you sit on it. You think about it. Maybe you write some emails in between, and then you get back together and you say, "You know, when you said that, I was thinking about it, and it made me think about this." And then you can go further. It's what I do for a living. People come once a week, once a month, twice a week. The rhythm, the ritual is
therapy.
It's
sort of like couples therapy,
yeah,
on a larger scale,
which I've been through plenty of times.
And here's the other piece that I want to kind of contextualize a little bit with, is that this is the work of democracy. Waging dialogue is the work of democracy. Our republic would never have been founded without the framers' willingness, and let's not focus just on the framers. Everyone's willingness, to some extent or another, whether forced into having to have opinion towards the Revolutionary War and all that, and independence, people were forced to think about it whether they wanted to or not. But people are talking about it, people were considering it, and whether they, and ultimately they were forced to decide, where do I fit in this paradigm? So the work of waging dialogue is the work of democracy, even though you may not say, oh, well, where's the immediate result? See, this is where we're very impatient people, and we always have been. And secondarily to that, or not even secondarily, what it is actually, you have to see it as part of a more holistic process. The holistic process being citizenship and how we engage with each other. And so if we start with the talking, the waging of the dialogue, and which I want to reemphasize from an earlier chat we all had, it's really first about the listening, right? Yeah. And all that. Not changing anybody's minds, none of that. But if we go from that perspective, then we can see, well, okay, this is the part of the journey of discovery of your civic identity and how it changes over lifespan development. Because we're not the same person we were when we were 20. We're not the same person, right? And as we know, and our relationship to our civic world changes. When we have children, we engage with the civic world differently than we do often when we're retired, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to think about it in that way, and that it's more of a funnel. if you can open up and start to have these types of difficult conversations, difficult listening sessions, you can then start to self-explore in ways to say, you know, this might be where I'm actually going to be able to then take the real world, pedal to the metal. I know I say that a lot, but getting the work done, you know, and maybe, who knows, maybe even run for office if you so choose. But
So
that's the journey.
I've often said, Alice and June, and I've been saying this for years, and I said it before Trump first ran. I look at America right now, and again, hit me over the head. I've looked at America as a married couple on the verge of a divorce, and they're going to give marital therapy one last shot. I like, in my mind, as when I speak to people, and I have over the years, that's what I use. Is there any, does that resonate with either one of you two?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. It's the people who are going to be the marital therapists are the people who can see both sides and and have a place to go to have these dialogues. The problem now is we're hijacked by the extremists.
Yeah.
The one-eyed people who just, and so we're watching a sporting match and just sitting there feeling impotent, you know. And you know, June, you were talking about, you know, that feeling of apathy. You know, it's, if you don't have any solution, you don't know what to do, you're going to be apathetic. But if somebody gives you a path and empowers you, and then a whole lot of people, I think, would come up out of their couches and start doing these things. And the other thing that June is doing with the kids is that it also makes it experience near for them, because they can use it when they get a job and their boss is telling them to do something that they don't want to do, you know, rather than the quiet quitting that we see in the younger generation. You know, how do you talk to your boss in a way that's true to yourself and true to them and solves the problem? So it gives them skills that are not just so I can run for office and vote for the right guy, but so I can talk to my boss and keep my job.
But we are, June, we are outnumbered. I mean, Alice is right. Right now, the entire landscape is dominated by one-eyed people, by extremists. Our political world incentivizes people to do this. The media world incentivizes, the social media and so I think the average American out there who, as you said a little bit ago, people have a desire for this, feels like we're really outnumbered right now.
But of course we're not, though. When you really look at the numbers, when you crunch the numbers, we're really not. And I think this is another, I do feel incumbent to bring into the fact that there's longitudinal research that shows we're not nearly as divided as we are. And if anybody wants to check that out, I'd really strongly suggest you check out The Perception Gap by More in Common, which gives, I think anybody who reads those types of surveys, More in Common isn't the only group that has done this, but there are many others that have been looking at this, and that we're being sold a false narrative. And that false narrative is saying, oh, you know, this is, you have to pick between these two. It's the bullies on the playground phenomenon. Yeah. And when you look at the bullies in the playground, it's just two. And who's standing around? I mean, come on, classic 80s movie, right? Everybody's standing there watching these two fight at each other. And then the next thing you know, all the rest of us, what do? We turn our backs on them and say, we can do better than this. And we're going to ignore those two bullies. We're going to do our own thing. So what I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you're going to use the parent analysis, these are parents of a lot of children, then the children are going to get really fed up with the parents fighting. And guess what? The risk is that the children turn against both of them. Now, I would say in this case, it's our employees, right? Our employees at the political level, you know, elected employees that have not been listening to the employers, and there's more of us than there are them. And I know, you know, and so I want you to think about that element of it, because we have to think about this not in terms of disempowerment. We have to talk about this in terms of empowerment.
Right, June. But again, and this is a different discussion, the structural impediments, because if I am a Republican or a Democrat today, and I'm going to run to go back to Congress, and my campaign is all about, I'm going to work across the aisle, I'm going to get along with the other side, we're going to try to find common ground. If I'm a Democrat, I'm going to work with Trump and his supporters. We're going to try to bring the country together. I could not win a primary. right
well,
now.
and that's the problem right there. And you're absolutely right. There are and there's like you said, that's a whole other conversation about the structural issues. But that's again where the good news comes in, because we know there are lots of people energized to work on those structural issues at the grassroots, upstate level, particularly. Lots of wonderful work being done in the 50-state experiment in democracy.
Yeah, yeah.
And if the constituents, applaud somebody who says, I understand how my opponent feels about this. However, I think of it, and then, instead of saying you're going over to the dark side, to say, good, you got two eyes, and that, I think that would help. But we don't do that now. We're just.
It would actually, you two, it would be a fascinating experiment, and maybe I'll do it. Literally run for Congress next year with kind of a waging dialogue platform to be this very unusual political figure who's going to go against every incentive right now to see how that would play.
Yeah, and it may be worth a try, because I think I'm obviously Alice and I are not taking a political stance in this, but because we can't do that. But in terms of the fact that there is a vastly underrepresented voice in this country, again, that third narrative that doesn't really have political representation as the two parties currently stand. And again, well documented all that, but we got to get to the Civics Corps, Joe.
What? We got to get what?
Talking about the work that Alice and I are specifically doing.
And so let's jump into that.
Perfect.
Who wants to start with that?
Well, I think I'd like.
It's your class, so
you want me to go? Okay, so quick history lesson. So I met through this other field work, getting to know these people across the country. They create a lot of there are spaces being held for people who are deeply interested in these topics, and through that process and the work that I got started with some colleagues of mine across this country, we initially formed a couple of organizations. I talked to Compassion America. We'll set that to the side maybe for another time where we can chat about that, but. In relationship to the work that we wanted to do was direct praxis. We were many of us are educators and community college professionals. We wanted to create an opportunity for something that we diagnosed. Many of us are historians as well. As a key factor and really probably a big upstream factor that is leading to the division in our country politically. And again, this is slow moving over time, which is intergenerational dialogue. That we don't, and add in the technology is one of the variables here. Won't go into that in depth, but the fact that there has been elements of a breakdown of intergenerational communication and dialogue, the lack of the kind of touch points that in previous eras allowed for these kinds of conversations to be role modeled, allowed for witnessing of how tensions can and cannot be resolved. That's not as much in the waters. And I've heard there's a lot of studies about this, for one, that do back up this decline in intergenerational, but also there's a lot of a desire for it. In fact, statistics show that most people, if you ask them, would you like to have more conversations across the generations? They're like, yeah, but what's the biggest barrier? Opportunities. So this is sort of us thinking about how we solve some of this. So through the process of sort of networking in relationship to creation of the Civics Corps, which was about, like I said, focused on having students develop pre-professional skills through project-based learning. In this case, putting on conversations that function around intergenerationality, and it gets students warmed up to having some of these kind of difficult conversations without it being laden with a lot of the tense political stuff or this or that can come, culture war stuff, because it really comes from lived memory, lived experience, right? And so that becomes about the sharing. So the differences emerge in different ways, and it empowers young people to take some risks that they might not otherwise be willing to take. So the model we designed was initially focused on that, but we also had this curriculum design that we really wanted to work on towards the goal of helping students do civic diplomacy. Yeah. So as this project evolved over time, and it was this very, very collaborative with the students helped shape and mold this process. And it's also very geared towards the community college students' reality. I want to make sure I mention that it's a different audience, but in that regard, to get them thinking about, and they said, hey, we want to do intergenerational dialogues for veterans. So every fall, in November, we do Veterans Speak, where we partnered with a number of national veterans organization, American Merchant Marine Veterans, Veterans for All Voters, Force Blue most recently, and also the American Legion Department of Michigan. And we pull in veterans from not only our local area, but across the country. And the students host an intergenerational dialogue and then do a podcast. And then they write an article. And, this gets them engaged civically. It gets them engaged in something that they deeply care about, which is veterans affairs, and supporting our veterans. And then after they do that, they move into, sorry, you're dealing with a college professor.
No, this is great. Go.
Then they do is they go into the second part, which is a deepening of their understanding of the neurological processes, which is where Alice and I partner to run historic memory dialogues that utilize the waging dialogue philosophy. And that trains them in on the civic diplomacy skills, and they do this dyad practice, which we're going to try as a triad practice in a bit, but to do this dyad practice. And this then takes what they worked on kind of as a group in the fall, and then allows them to get more into that individuation and the embodiment, if you will, of what they're starting to craft as more of a civic identity for being professionals who are focused on that element of the civic role that they're going to play. And that means we're focused on people-facing professions. Young people are being thrown into this. Ugh. And if there's no other reason to turn down the heat, what about our young people who are going out into these professions, who are not ready? They're not war torn, and they don't have the calluses necessarily to those levels to be able to deal with when that parent's screaming at them, "You're teaching this," and they're thinking, "I thought I was just teaching a lesson. Hold on," And these students have to be a little bit more braced for those realities, and we have good education programs and things, sure, but the earlier, the better that they get those. So our criminal justice majors, social work, education, healthcare, these people that have to deal with these tensions that emerge when all they're trying to do is just do a good job, right? And get to the next level of their career.
June, who's doing all of that?
So Allison and her colleague Matt and I, while I'm on the board too, affiliated with Waging Dialogue, we have developed out the curriculum.
This is all part of Waging Dialogue.
This is under the Waging Dialogue banner, and the project is the Civics Corps. And the Civics Corps would be is an organization that we only have one branch at the moment, but we are actually open because we do it on Zoom. And so students technically from community colleges across the nation can join in, and we do have partnered schools that advertise and see if
And if people want to get information, you two, on that or anything you're doing, wagingdialogue.org, the website is the initial place to go on everything we're talking about right now.
Yep. And of course, they can always reach out to Alice and I through that medium, and we're more than happy to talk about it. But again, the goal is, and this is what makes our work distinct amongst some of the others, is that we are interdisciplinary. We use the historic memory dialogue in it with the psychoanalytical principles. We've created a very unique product in that regard. And that it is career focused. It's career prep focused for these young people. Now, that said, the same principles that we're utilizing in the design of this training, and they get a micro credential and do another podcast episode when they're done. All that adds their resume, that kind of stuff. But the same skill set is something that we're working on, another training model for the general public.
Got it.
And it's something that once you learn it, again, it becomes a cross-applicable skill. And isn't that what we want from education? Education is not just about training for a job. It's about training for life.
So a lot of Alice and June, who you're working with on all this stuff right now, is potentially practitioners, professional people to use this in their professional lives. And then the idea is to take the same skills and everything to the general public.
Yes, yeah. We're developing different projects in different arenas to bring out what's already there.
Yeah.
People utilize what they're already doing and expand it to add this level of complexity. And I did about 10 years ago, I designed and taught a course for middle and high school students in an after-school program in Harlem. And basically what we did was we gave the kids different identities, careers ranging from, a disabled veteran and a janitor to a celebrity musician and a CEO doctors and lawyers and teachers, and they, and then we gave them salaries and we gave them tax brackets. We made them write checks to the government. And then we said, okay, what's the government going to do with your money? And it was eye-opening, not just for the kids, but for the staff. Something that simple, oh, is that what happens to the money in our checks? And is that how political decisions are made? If you give more money to pay these people, then you're not going to have enough to hire those people. And
Yeah.
It got them thinking about that.
Am I missing the boat when I say that in a way you two, with Waging Dialogue, all the programs you're doing, in a way you're trying to help create teachers, not literally teachers,
Yeah.
but give these skills to people who can get into professions where they can help then teach people these model.
Absolutely.
That's a really good way of
right. That's cool.
Well,
that's
and
really
that's
cool.
the intergenerationality of it, Joe, because in the end of the day, no matter what our political struggles are, our ultimate audience is not really the adults, it's children. At the end of the day, if we're going to have the republic survive over years, our real ultimate...
I'm not convinced of that, June. I'm not convinced. We'll get into that later.
It's going to survive?
No.
Well, and there you go. So, but regardless of where this ends up, the ultimate audience still remains children, because if we're going to have hope, we have to be able to focus in on the things that give us hope, and children tend to give us hope, and we want to empower them so that they can have hope in our republic as well.
The website is wagingdialogue.org. Everybody check it out. Alice, two final questions, you two. The average person listening to us right now, when it comes to the work you guys are doing at Waging Dialogue, what can they do? Like if somebody goes to your website to check out all the stuff you're doing, what can they do?
If you contact us and tell me what you're doing and what your interest is, there will be multiple projects. You can do dialogues, you can do something at work, you can help develop something. Yeah, you can do, we're working on an app. There's lots of potential ways that these ideas can be used. If you're in the political arena, talk about how to enter the political arena, how to use these two-eyed models and get people talking while preserving your center. There's lots of, develop your own project.
That's a perfect answer. Yeah. That's a perfect answer. Wagingdialogue.org. That my final question then is, the average person listening to us, forget about your website and your work, just out there living their daily lives in this dangerously divided country right now, this polarized country. What, June, I'll start with you, but your final advice to the average American out there living right now who's scared of where we're at, and they're looking to, what can they do in their lives? What would you tell them? What can they do?
Well, I would start with something like a diet on the toxicity of whatever their social media, that kind of stuff. Start with that kind of diet, and then
what do you, June? What kind of diet would you recommend?
Well, so there are alternatives. We know that, for example, All Sides allows us to curate. There's also Sans Media, which is, I think, Straight Arrow News, right? Okay. Some really good sources that allow you to be the discerner, right? More so than that. And then also this inward work. And I think it's got to start with being willing to maybe just even, and this is where I'm going to come from, and I know that at some point we should probably do, Joe, we'd love to have a dialogue with you that kind of does this historically.
Oh, I'd love that. I'd love that.
We should definitely do that. And maybe next time that's what we'll focus just on, is role modeling one of these techniques.
Cool.
But then also to ask themselves some of those serious questions about, how do I want to show up for my democracy? How do I want to show up, more so though for my community? Because your community is where democracy starts. This is about, and let me add that to this piece, because we haven't said that yet. This is really about community building. Whenever you're talking about this, because it isn't about necessarily, again, I'm going to go back to that pothole. don't worry about fixing the big problems. Be aware of your sphere of influence. Be aware that you're only going to be able to affect change within a certain realm, right? That's realistic and it's human, and it's also compassionate to yourself, because if you don't take any of the view, you're gonna drive yourself crazy. And so where are the touch points? And that starts again with getting to talk to people in your community. But I would argue, sit down and talk with your relatives. People that you can, and I would say relatives that they're not gonna just go jumping off the, don't go to the most politicized people first. Okay, don't go there first. Go to the people that you say, and lean in with curiosity and ask them questions about, how did you come to shape your political view? How did your political views come into shape? What are the forces in your life, or the issues, or the people in your life that affected the way you look at how you relate to politics? And moreover, not politics alone. Let's lean into citizenship. What does it mean to you to serve your community? What does it mean to you to try and fix problems? How have you been involved in fixing problems? Ask those very open-ended questions and sit back. And again, this is why we say waging dialogue is so much more about listening, because the dyad process is about letting somebody else talk and you listen, and then they do the same for you, but only asking clarifying questions, and questions that ask for deeper understanding. That's it. And if you start there, that is just get you thinking, and it can help you decide. Like we said, it's more of a funnel into where you're going to land in your own civic identity, because all of our civic identities have been tousled quite a bit in the last decade and a half, let's say.
Alice, jump in. The average person listening to us right now, give them some advice in their own lives on what to do.
Be true to yourself, true to the person you're talking to, and just plain true at the same time, and magic will happen.
Damn you. I love that. You stink. I want to steal that. That is so good. Oh my God. I want that on a bumper sticker. I want that on a plane flying around the country constantly.
You may have it when you run for office.
Oh my God. Well, by the way, if I do, you two are both my super duper secret private advisors to see if this experiment would work. Dr. Alice Maher, Dr. June Cleese. By the way, Substack, everybody listening, if you are on Substack, subscribe to these two on Substack. They've both promised me they're going to keep writing and putting stuff out there. At Alice L, am I right? Alice L, yes, Maher, and at June K 2020. Subscribe to both of them on Substack, but most importantly, as importantly, wagingdialogue.org is their website. Go there. See where you can help, see with your questions, look at everything they're doing, wagingdialogue.org. June and Alice, you two rock. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Really appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thanks guys. Thanks, Keith. Bye-bye. Be brave, everybody.
Thank you for listening. Remember to listen, share, and follow The Social Contract with Joe Walsh on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere great podcasts are found. And be sure to leave a 5-star review. This has been The Social Contract.